here today with Shirley Olson, candidate for school board. I'm Aaron Schweitzer, publisher of The Source, joined by Nicole Vulcan, editor for the publication. Shirley, thanks for taking some time out of your day to speak with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So why don't you just introduce yourself and say why you are interested in running for this position?
Sure. Shirley Olson. I can add a doctor to that. I do have a doctorate in educational leadership from USC. I've lived here in Sun River for 13 years, and I have followed the Bend Lapine schools because I am a career educator. I've been in 3 states, worked in 8 public school districts, and 5 national educational private agencies. So I like to follow schools. I miss not knowing what's going on. I also have 2 grandchildren who attend Bend Lapine schools. So I'm very interested, and I need to add that Zone 4 is the South Deschutes County. I have been working with the Sun River Women's Club to fund philanthropy projects for South Deschutes County for the last several years. So I know a lot about the needs of our vulnerable population, especially now. So I want that South Deschutes to have a voice on the board that understands what some of the special issues are. Obviously, we have lots of critical issues right now, but sometimes they get overlooked a little bit down in Lapine, and I want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thanks for that. So that goes nicely into the next question of what's your biggest concern for the students of the district?
My biggest concern is really twofold. One is equity. We, as a growing community, we have experienced just amazing growth with our vulnerable kids and our kids of color. And we have lots of data. The district has done a really good job of accumulating data that helps us look at student achievement rates and rates of excellence, if you will, and rates of completion in many different ways. And some of those pieces of data are quite disturbing. The second part is graduation. I feel very, very strongly that graduation rates absolutely have to be improved. So it's my little logo is equity and excellence, and that's really what I'm talking about. Vulnerable kids and graduating from high school for sure.
Shirley, what do you, as a career educator, what do you think makes a good school board member in your opinion? What's the role?
The role is a very behind the scenes one in many ways. The role of the board is to set policy. The role of the board is not to micromanage and be in the way of the administration. The very most important thing, and this is another reason I decided to run, the very most important job for a school board is to hire a new superintendent, which they have just done. So that superintendent comes from out of state. We need to be sure that he has the support and the understanding of the policies of the district. And the other part is there are administrative limits. So the board's job is to set the policy. The administration's job is to make it happen.
Awesome. Well, so as you might be aware, the legislature may soon pass a bill that allows local governments the option to ban people with concealed carry permits from bringing firearms into public buildings. In your opinion, should the schools and the district office of Bend Lapine Schools be gun-free zones where anyone has to check their gun at the door?
Yes, I do believe that. And in fact, the current Bend Lapine School Board has 2 members testifying right now in Salem. So I cannot live through anymore. I've been to Columbine High School. I cannot live anymore with those kinds of I don't even want to call them accidents, issues. So yes, I do believe it's very strong.
Thank you.
The legislature is just this week allocated $250 million for summer programs to help kids who've been doing online learning, to jumpstart them, to get them back where they need to be. How do you think that funding should be used in this district?
Well, I did have the opportunity to visit with the CFO of the Bend Public Schools a couple of weeks ago, and they have plans in place. And one of the biggest ones for the use of that money that will come directly to the district is for 2 years of summer school for targeted kids. And I think that's very smart. Nobody's going to make up a year in 6 weeks of summer school, but if we can get them moving during the summer into the next school year, then I think that's really important. I thought that was very cool to have the plans in place. It's part of that. It's part of that student success money too. They've only gotten about a third of that money so far, but I think it's coming. And that money really supported hotspots and technology for all kids. And the summer school piece, I think, to use the new money is very smart.
So, well, we're on the topic of the pandemic a little bit here. What's been your overall impression of how the district has handled the pandemic, and what might you have done differently?
I'm not sure that I could state what I might have done differently, because I certainly know more now than I did even a couple of years ago, since I decided to run for the board. The good thing, Bend Lapine schools were actually in a very good place a year ago in March when everything shut down. They already had the technology. The previous superintendent, as you know, was a technology guru. And the kids had their iPads. The teachers were learning and using technology in the classroom, so that when this hit, I would say, in my personal opinion, I think Bend Lapine Schools was one of the districts most ready to implement online learning in a total fashion. So I was very proud of them. Again, that's kind of one of the reasons. I think they're on the forefront, so I'd like to be a part of it.
You kind of mentioned this when we first began talking at the beginning about students of color. And the past year has certainly brought increased attention to those students and disparities in that area. What, if any, changes would you make or propose in the district to better meet the needs of those students?
Well, that's a big question. Again, I go back to the data that has been produced over the last couple of years in the district, and injustice and racial equity come in many, many different forms. I do think the board and the administration need to define what equity means for each type of student. And then if you can define what equity means, then you can evaluate whether or not it's in place. So I don't know what the answers are, but I think we're on the road to discovering how to make it successful for every kid.
When, as somebody who's going to be on the board, do you feel like you're in a good position to guide that policy? I mean, that will be a board level, that would be a board level decision.
I think I certainly would have some insight. As I said, I've worked nationally. I mentioned I've been in Columbine High School. I mentioned that I've been in Miami-Dade high schools that are all locked down with officers on site. The gates are locked when the kids get in, and they are not unlocked until they leave. So I have been in many school districts with a higher population of kids of color, and I don't know exactly how to say this, but kids are kids. There should not be a difference in what kind of education one kid gets and another kid gets. But again, you got to have the data to understand where the gaps are, and then look at filling the gaps. I know that's kind of a general answer, but yeah, if I had if I had a complete answer, I'd be really smart.
Shirley, I'm curious about curriculum in particular as it relates to this conversation. Do you have any input about how the district could improve in that regard?
Yeah, my master's was actually in curriculum and instruction, and Oregon has a few laws that really need to be challenged. One of them is the textbook adoption cycle, and the textbook adoption cycle doesn't give individual districts, too much room to make their own decisions, and I do think that has something to do with it. I also think in our world now of technology that companies are pushing out intact curriculum right and left. If you want to learn about U.S. history, here it is, in 3 discs, or online in 12 sessions, or those need to be evaluated very carefully. Again, what are the goals? What are the goals for the kids? And what are the curriculum expectations? What are the standards that we're trying to have to help kids meet, and then evaluate the materials. I'm not saying that they're not already doing that. I think they are, but I just think it's continuing to change, and the state of Oregon needs to address some of those issues.
Shirley, recently, over several years, and certainly during COVID, social media has begun to play an enormous role in the pressures that school board members live under. It's certainly true for the superintendent. It came up quite a bit during the superintendent hiring. As somebody who is looking to get into this environment, how do you brace yourself for that increasingly toxic atmosphere that surrounds public service these days?
Yeah, everybody has an opinion about everything, That's one of my bylines. Just ask me. I'll have an opinion. But I do think you have to have some safeguards, and you have to be smart about what you post on social media, and you have to be smart about what you react to. Anything in writing or published, it can be very detrimental. So you do have to have a bit of a steel jacket. That's probably not one of my best strengths, but again, over 50 years, I've learned a lot about how to deal with angry parents, how to face issues that students bring up. And it's I don't want to use that phrase because it's so overused, it takes a village, but it does take absolute collegial cooperation and really good relationships between all board members, between board members and administration. Those principals are sitting out there in those schools, particularly middle schools and high schools, and they are very vulnerable also. And you have to have some legal safeguards, which I know Ben does, but you also have to have some personal ones.
I had written down this question, and you answered some of it related to communication, but what responsibilities do school board members have in terms of communication with staff and parents and community at large?
Well, first of all, the biggest thing is to listen. We have to be aware of what people are thinking and feeling. So you have to listen. You do not respond individually. You communicate within the board and within administration and with staff. The teachers union is very strong and is led very well. And again, the relationship, I believe, is strong, but it does take a lot. There's never too much communication. It takes a lot to address issues, to address threats, to address changes. Takes a lot of communication. So I think that's very strong. As you can tell, I'm not real shy about telling you what I think, but I'm also smart enough to know that there are many times to keep your mouth shut and just listen.
So I'm just curious about, there's been a lot of communication among school board members and community members on Facebook over the last year. Would that be something that you would take part in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, they have been very inclusive to us as candidates. So it's been very helpful.
Shirley, Ben Lapine Schools recently hired a new superintendent, which on the topic of social media, got his fair share. Later this year. Did the school board make the right call in who they hired, in your opinion? And secondly, what's your opinion, or what would be your approach in steering the district's new leader in the right direction?
I certainly was not involved at all in the superintendent search, but I am confident that the board did exactly what they needed to do in order to choose someone. They had criteria, they had information, they had input from staff, parents, even students. So I am confident that they made the right decision. I think as a board, and by the way, if we have 4 new board members also and a new superintendent, you want to talk about communication, but steering is not really the right word. It's setting the policy and then supporting the superintendent and his staff to get there.
So we're talking about policy. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. That's a responsibility of the board to set policy. What, if any, policies would you want to revisit or adopt, should you be elected?
Well, we have about 4 hot issues on right now. And the gun issue that we talked just a little bit about earlier is certainly one that will require the school district to set policy. There's some issues with vaccinations. There's some issues with access to menstrual products. We may be involved in policies to set the direction for the district in any or all of those hot spots.
Yeah, on that subject, how do you feel about the district's current policy around sex education?
Since I have a granddaughter who just went through it a couple years ago, went through the curriculum, I have seen the letter that goes out to parents with the opt-out, and I think it's certainly appropriate. There are many ways parents can choose exactly what and how their children will be involved. I do think it's a school role. It's been a school role for a long time. And most parents appreciate it, is what I think. It's not easy to talk to your kids sometimes. So when it's dealt with as a piece of scientific evidence and knowledge, I do think it, in most cases, helps kids and parents out.
So we don't have a lot more questions, but we wanted to know, what have we missed, or what is something that you want to bring up that we haven't touched on?
We've touched on an awful lot of things. I think if I just wanted to make a closing statement, I have been privileged to work in really good school districts with superintendents, 2 of whom were superintendents of the year nationally. I've seen a lot, I've heard a lot, I've seen some mistakes, I've seen some real successes. I just want to be there to help expand the knowledge of the board. And I think I can offer that if they want it.
Shirley, thank you for joining us, and thanks for putting yourself out there and being willing to give yourself to the community. It's a big step. It's increasingly fraught, like we mentioned, with social media, and it means a lot to have people like you step up. So,
well, I do have one more question before we go.
Okay, cool.
What I'd like to give you an opportunity to say anything you'd like to say about the differences between you and your opponent.
I have very little information about my opponent. I do know that he has not responded to several of the offers and opportunities to talk. I do know he's asking questions about posting yard signs. That's all I know.
Fair enough. Well, thanks so much for being here with us today, and best of luck in your race.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to have a community that's so involved and willing to be involved. I think that's really important too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shirley, we appreciate it.
All right. Take care.